Hey everyone, it's James from the Fit RV and welcome to the third video in the RV Basics series where we're going to have a light and breezy chat about sewage. That's right, we're going over your RV's wastewater plumbing system. So, just like the previous videos about RV electrical and freshwater plumbing, when you're done watching this one, you should know your RV's wastewater plumbing well enough that you can get out there and enjoy a weekend of camping without being afraid of what you have to deal with later. Because knowledge is power, even if it's just knowledge of how to poop in the woods, which was the working title of this video, by the way, How to Poop in the Woods. But I digress. This video is sponsored by our friends at Winnebago RVs, who want you to be great outdoors, so thank you to them for that. But this information is not Winnebago specific. It should be applicable to most RVs produced in the last 40 years or so because, let's face it, RV sanitation is not exactly a rapidly evolving hotbed of innovation, but it is very important to get it right. So let's get started. Now, this is normally the part where I tell you to read your manual, and you probably don't need to read the manual to know how to use a toilet and take a shower, although the very first time you use an RV toilet, you may wish you had a manual because they're not exactly like home toilets. No, the stuff you're going to be wanting your manual for will be things like, where are your dump valves and how many of them are there? How do you hook up to your black tank flush system? Those kinds of things are going to vary from rig to rig, and from here in my shop, I don't know the specific answers to those questions for your RV. But your manual does know, and that's why you should read it. And after we're done here, you'll have a really good idea of the kinds of information you'll be looking for. And of course, if I should mention something here and your manual says something different, well, maybe then just go with what your manual says because it should know better than I do. So, jumping right into sewage, here's a very high-level overview of an RV's wastewater plumbing system. You have toilets which empty into black tanks, and you have sinks and showers which drain into gray tanks. Both the black and gray tanks eventually empty to a wastewater outlet, which is where you'll dump the wastewater from your RV into a land-based sanitation facility. Now, one thing to notice from this diagram is that just like it has been since the days of the ancient Romans, your RV's wastewater plumbing system is gravity driven. So your toilets tend to be physically above your black tanks, and your sinks and showers will be above, or at least higher up than, your gray tanks. And the holding tanks will be higher up than your wastewater outlet, and that outlet should be the lowest point in your wastewater plumbing system. Now, the black and gray tanks are called holding tanks, and that holding word is important because that is the main difference between RV plumbing and home plumbing. At home, once the water goes down the drain, you pretty much don't ever have to deal with it or think about it again. But in an RV, you hold on to it, maybe not like that, but you hold on to it in a holding tank, and at some point you have to go back and do something appropriate with the contents. So you have to be a little more involved with your wastewater when you're in an RV. It's not just flush and forget like it is at home. Now, I said these systems run on gravity, and the great thing about gravity is that it doesn't break down or require electrical power. But there are some situations where a gravity-driven system won't work, so there are some exceptions to this. For example, in our own RV, a Winnebago Echo, there's a pump to move water from the bathroom sink and shower into the gray tank because the gray tank is located above the floor and gravity doesn't work like that. So that's one example. Also, if you happen to notice the word macerator in any description of your RV's plumbing, either your toilet itself or in reference to a sewer drain or something, this is also a type of waste pump with blades to chop up the waste. Now there's a visual for you. These sump pumps, waste pumps, macerators, what have you, they all require power to move the water where you want it to go because they're not necessarily using gravity. But these are the exceptions rather than the rule. So when you go through your manual, right, you're reading your manual. If you don't see that your RV specifically has a macerator or a waste pump, well then you should assume it doesn't and we're good to go with just gravity. So that's where we're going to spend the bulk of our time here. So now that you know you have holding tanks and you have a rudimentary understanding of your RV's wastewater plumbing, what is the least you need to know so that we can get you started going out camping in your RV and you're not going to create an unpleasant situation for yourself somewhere down the line? Well, you need to know where your holding tanks are, like physically, where are the tanks? That's a good thing to know, and I'll explain why. You'll want to know what fixture drains to what tank. You'll want to know how to check the tank levels of your waste tanks because trust me, you do not want to overfill them. You'll also want to know where the dump valves are and how to operate them. I'll go over some general helpful tips for maintaining and dumping your tanks, and we'll close out with a brief discussion about some other kind of fringe toilet options. Well, some of them I wouldn't really call fringe, but they're certainly not the RV normal here in North America. That's sort of our roadmap for the rest of the video. Okay, so your holding tanks. Where are they? What do they look like? Well, I've got a couple random pictures here. Waste tanks are usually, and thankfully, opaque, and they're usually located underneath the RV because remember, it's a gravity-driven system and they need to be kind of lower than the fixtures they serve. Now, there are some cases where the holding tanks are inside or in a heated storage compartment, but probably 90% of RV holding tanks out there are underneath their RVs. Now, there's some variation here, but the black tank is usually, and rather conveniently, located directly beneath the toilet, as in much of the time you could just open the flush valve and stare right down into the abyss. Now, gray tanks are a bit more flexible as far as location goes because the piping leading to them is smaller and there are no solids that you're moving, but they're also usually located underneath the RV. But if you look underneath the RV and you see more than one tank, how do you know which is which? Well, an easy way to tell is to look at the outlet of the tank. A black tank will have like a large diameter piping leading out of it because it's got solids in it. And you really don't want anything getting hung up on its way out of the tank. A gray tank, on the other hand, will usually have a smaller opening of pipe running out of it. And if the piping, it doesn't always, it could have a large pipe. And if that piping size doesn't settle the question for you, your dump valve handles are usually labeled or color coded so you can trace them back to their tanks to know for sure. But now, why do you care where your tanks are? Well, for example, let's say you're contemplating a late fall trip, and if you know that your black tank is just hanging out there outside your RV, you might elect to not use it during that trip to keep it safe from potential freezing. Or let's say maybe you're parked like really unlevel at some point and things don't seem to be draining properly. Well, then it would be really good to know how your tanks are situated, and then you might realize that you don't need to panic because water just doesn't drain uphill. Okay, now, what drains to what? Why would you want to know that? Well, here's an example from our own RVing experience. Our first RV had a 30-gallon black tank in a small van, which is huge for a van, but we were filling it up every 3 days. That's a bit excessive, and we both swore we didn't have the stomach flu, so what was going on? Well, as it turns out, the bathroom sink also drained to the black tank. So as we were washing our hands, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, we were also filling up the black tank. But once we knew that bit of information, we were able to change our behavior just a little bit. Basically, don't leave the water on full blast while you wash your hands. And suddenly, we got much more time in between trips to the dump station. So how do you figure out what drains to what? Only two easy ways come to mind. The first is to just look at the plumbing and figure it out. I mean, the water has to go downhill, so you can kind of follow the pipes down. You may have to look in the back of cabinets and such to find it, but that's one way to figure it out. The other way is to just run water into your various drains and use your tank monitors to see which tank is filling up from which drain. And fabulous segue, that's going to bring us to tank monitors. These devices are how you're going to check the levels in your tanks, and even though there are different kinds, they should all have a control panel somewhere inside your RV. So one of your first RV ownership tasks should be to locate and familiarize yourself with your holding tank monitor panel. So now let's talk about the different kinds of tank monitors. The first and most common type are the probe sensors. There's a picture of that here. And if it looks kind of Frankenstein-y, like someone just drove a screw through the side of the tank and hooked up a wire to it, that's actually more or less what it is. It's not terribly sophisticated. These work because water conducts electricity. And so as the level of liquid in your tank rises, it makes an electrical connection between the probes, and you can use that to light a light up. So now the probe style sensors will have a monitoring function that kind of works like, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, et cetera, et cetera. And so what you do is you push the button on your control panel for the tank you want to check, and then you see which light lights up, and that's how you know sort of how much is in your tank. Pretty simple stuff. But remember, we're talking about waste tanks here, not just plain water. And part of the deal is that these tanks are going to have other stuff in them. And if that other stuff, grease, wads of toilet paper, what have you, gets stuck up on the sensors, it can interfere with those probes' ability to conduct electricity. And the tank monitors will then start giving you faulty readings. You can combat these faulty readings by keeping your tanks well rinsed and cleaned out. So that's probe sensors. The next kind are sensors that are sort of mounted to the outside of the tank. By mounting the sensors on the outside, they avoid a lot of that fouling that the in-tank sensors might experience. Now, some of them are what I'd call spot sensors, and they'd give you the same kind of 1/4, 1/2, 3/4 readings as the probe type. But there's another kind, and you can see that here, that are a continuous strip. And these will give you a digital readout of exactly how full your tank is. So if you get a reading of 1/2 and you're wondering, am I just over 1/2 full or am I almost all the way to 3/4 full? Well, you'll know because the strip monitor will give you a reading like I'm 54% full. So reading those kinds of sensors is pretty easy. And there are some other kinds of sensors you might see being used here and there. I've seen pressure transducers used to measure the water pressure near the bottom of the tank, and then if you know the tank geometry and you calibrate the sensor, you can use that to kind of figure out a digital reading in a percentage of full. There are even sonar sensors out there. But regardless of what kind of sensor you have, as the end user, you need to figure out 1, where's your monitor panel? 2, how do I turn it on or activate it? And 3, how do I interpret the readings? And now you should be able to do that. Okay, on to dump valves. You need to know where these are, and thankfully this is pretty easy since it's a gravity-driven system. These are going to be located pretty low on your RV, and fortunately the RV industry is more or less standardized in putting them kind of towards the rear on the driver's side of your RV, so that's where you should start looking. When you find them, you'll find some handles and an opening. The handles should be labeled black and gray or something appropriate to the tank configuration on your RV. And there will likely be a cap over the opening, as you can see in the picture there. You do want to hang on to that cap. Besides containing any leftover drips, the cap keeps the inside of your system from drying out. You see, your dump valves are kind of blade style valves that kind of go like that. And there's a rubber seal around them. You want that seal to be nice and pliable, not dried out and cracked. So hang on to your cover and do remember to use it. Now, if you don't see your dump valves right away, they may be tucked away inside a storage compartment, like they are on our Echo, for example. Many Class A motorhomes and larger towables will put the service connections like that inside of an exterior compartment door. Just look around or check your manual and you'll find them. Now, depending on your rig and its tank configuration, there may be more than one dump opening. If you've got 2 gray tanks, for example, one for the forward and aft bathrooms or galleon bathrooms or something, there may well be 2 dump openings with 2 handles for that. And it would be up to you if you wanted to combine those outside the RV with like a Y configuration of a hose or something like you see there. Okay, dumping. Now it's getting real. You know where your tanks are, you know they're full, and you know where the dump valves and opening are. So how do you dump them? Well, just like most things in RVing, it's not hard, you just have to know how. And you do want to get this right because the penalty for a poor performance at the dump station can be pretty severe if you catch my drift. Now, besides your rig, you're going to need 3 things. The first is a dump station. Now, there's one pictured here, and I'd love to tell you that all dump stations are that nice and tidy and clean and inviting, but sadly they are not. But you do need a dump station, so you got to find one. You can find them at campgrounds, travel centers, RV dealerships, what have you. Basically, it's a 4-inch hole in the ground that connects to a land-based sewage system. You'll also need some rubber gloves because, please, just wear some rubber gloves. I mean, yes, I know one of the main goals of the process is to not get anything on you, but just in case. Plus, you don't know what the last person to use the dump station was like, so just wear the gloves. And the third thing you'll need is a 3-inch RV sewer hose. Now, one probably came with your RV, but an upgraded sewer hose, like the one here, is a common RV upgrade item. Personally, I like the ones that have an adapter that kind of threads into the pipe on the ground, but everyone's going to develop their own preferences here. So what's the procedure? Well, the first step is to pull up to the dump station. And by now, you know where your dump valves are, so, try to get those close to the hole in the ground as you're pulling into the dump station. Now, true story here. The very first time I had to dump our RV, I went to the dump station at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, thinking that I did not want an audience the first time I did this. Well, literally minutes after I pulled up, 3 apparently very experienced and rather impatient RVers in fifth wheels pulled up behind me, and I think they must have been coming back from like a hunting trip or something, I don't know. Anyway, they proceeded to idle behind me the entire time I was there. It was a little intimidating for my opening night kind of performance. So if that's the kind of luck you tend to have, maybe the very first time you dump, treat yourself to a full hookup RV campground spot. you'll get your very own hole in the ground to dump into, and you can take your time the first time you go through the process and be calm and get it right. All right, so you've arrived at the dump station. Next, glove up, then uncover or uncap the dump station, opening the hole in the ground. And if you see heavy rocks in the vicinity of the dump station, or maybe a brick, it's not because RVers are all amateur geologists. It's just because your sewer hose is gonna go from having nothing into it to having a whole lot of unpleasant stuff in it in less than a second. And you don't want the end of the hose to jump around, and it doesn't do that, but you don't want it to come out of the hole. So back in the Stone Age, some RVer had the idea to put a rock on the hose to keep it from splashing about. And we've all been doing that ever since. So you connect the tail end of your hose into the dump opening and hold it in place with a weight or a rock, or depending on how well you're getting along that day, maybe your partner's foot. Connect the other end of the hose to your RV. Double check your connections and then pull the ripcord. Now, generally, you want to dump the black tank first, and then your gray tank or tanks. The water in your gray tanks is by no means clean, but it should be cleaner than whatever is in your black tank. So dumping the gray water last gives the hose kind of a dirty rinse out. So you dump the black tank, you wait until you hear it stop flowing, then close the black tank valve, and then open the gray tank valve, wait until you hear it stop flowing, close that valve, you just push the handle back into place, and that's how you stop. Now you're in the home stretch. Disconnect your sewer hose and dump any water remaining in it down the dump opening. Put the cover back on the dump opening on your RV, you know, that cap I told you to save. If you have water available, rinse out your sewer hose, but if you've got 3 impatient guys in fifth wheels revving their engines behind you, maybe try not to take so long with that rinsing step. Cover the hole in the ground back up, clean up after yourself as like a courtesy to the next RVer, and presto, you're done. All right, now for some general tips about your RV's wastewater plumbing system and dumping and keeping everything healthy. And the first tip is water is your friend. And if you remember nothing else from this video, but you remember that water is your friend, I'll feel like I've done my job. You won't create a problem in your RV's waste plumbing by using too much water, but you can create problems by not using enough. So water is your friend. And the next couple tips kind of hit on that again. Number 2, always keep water in your tanks. Don't let your tanks get completely dry. Remember drying out seals, etc. Always keep a little water in your tanks. Number 3, use enough water when you flush. Now you're not going to use gallons like you do at home, right? But use enough, because what you don't want to do is to create like a really dense sludge in your tanks. That's a lot harder to move out. By using enough water when you flush, you kind of dilute things and you help them break down more, and mostly you'll make it easier for them to leave the tank. Now you'll be tempted, especially if you're like dry camping without hookups, you'll be tempted to try to use very little water when you flush just to conserve your water. But you got to kind of fight that for the health of your RV's waste plumbing system. Number 4, leave some water in the toilet between uses. I don't mean like a whole bowl full, because like in a motorhome or a travel trailer, it would slosh out, right? You don't want that. But in a home toilet, you've got like a trap. If you look at the side of a toilet, you'll see an S bend kind of thing, and that keeps a plug of water between you and the bathroom and unpleasant sewer gases down below. In an RV toilet, you don't have that. It just drains straight down, right? So by keeping maybe just like a ½ inch of water covering that seal, because that seal is all it's between you and the air in your RV and the black tank. By keeping just a little ½ inch of water on that seal, you're gonna help yourself have a better time with the toilet. Number 5, never leave the black tank valve open. Now, if you've ever heard of a poo pyramid, that's kind of what this tip is about. If you've got a full hookup campsite, you might be tempted to hook up to the sewer connection and then like leave your gray tank open so you could shower for like hours. And that might be okay, right? You could do that with the gray tank. If you do it with the black tank, what'll happen is the solids will fall to the bottom of the tank. There's another visual for you. And then the water will drain off, leaving just the solids, and then they'll just harden and they'll start to build a pyramid, and that's what happens. We've never had it happen, but I've heard of it happening, and it doesn't sound fun. You don't want it either. All right, number 6, do use a tank treatment, something to help break down the waste. You want things like in a nice, I hate to use the word slurry, but you want some sort of nice slurry of stuff that's going to drain out of your tank, and a waste additive, a tank treatment, will help you get that. Number 7, use the right toilet paper and a bit less than you do at home. Now notice I said the right toilet paper, not necessarily RV toilet paper. The right toilet paper is something that breaks down quickly. And there's a simple test you can do to determine the right toilet paper. Like if you're wondering if you can use your home toilet paper in the RV, this is what we did years ago. There's a video. Take a couple squares of toilet paper, put it in a quart jar of water, shake it up, let it sit for a couple hours, come back and see what you got. If you've got sludge, like toilet paper dissolved completely, that toilet paper is safe to use in your RV. If it looks like you could wring it out and use it again, don't use that in your RV. Okay, number 8. Dump your tanks when they are 2/3 full or more. This is probably important because you don't want things to kind of dribble out of your black tank, right? You want things to whoosh out of the black tank. So easy way to do that is wait until your tanks are 2/3 or more full and then go dump. That helps get you a nice rush out of your tanks. Number 9, first the black, then the gray. We've already sort of talked about that, and you'll get sort of that rinse. And speaking of rinse, number 10, if you have a tank flush installed in your RV, use it. Now, I could go into a whole nother video about how to use that and not to hook up to the tank flush without opening the drain valve and whatever, but read your manual. That will tell you how to use the tank flush on your own RV. Okay, I promised we'd talk about other types of toilets, so here we go. We've been RVing for quite a while now, and we have been able to use a number of different toilet options. And the one thing I can say for certain is that none of them, literally none of them, is perfect or ideal. In all cases, you're gonna have to do something to deal with human waste at some point, and that's just not fun no matter how you slice it. So if you hear of some cool new type of toilet that sounds too good to be true, probably is. You're not suddenly going to start pooping rainbows because you changed your toilet. There will be something, and probably something unpleasant, that you still have to do. So, what are some of these other kinds of toilet systems? Well, first let's talk about a composting toilet. We had a composting toilet in our last RV, Lance, for literally years, and we eventually sort of made our peace with it, but it wasn't toilet nirvana like some videos would have you believe. In short, a composting toilet works by separating solid and liquid wastes into different containers, and the liquids you just drain off when they get full, and the solids you aerate with a fan and turn over every so often until they break down. Now, these toilets have fans in them that run, pulling air out 24/7, and when they're working properly, they really don't smell, which is pretty amazing because, it's just a bucket full of poop. But they don't always work properly, and that's important to realize. We have a whole 20-minute video about our experience with a composting toilet, so if you're interested, do check that one out. Oh, and composting toilets do not make compost. Don't go putting that stuff on your tomato plants. You will not be happy. Then we have cassette toilets. These aren't so popular here in North America yet, but they are nearly 100% popular in Europe. They are starting to find their way into more and more North American RVs, like our own Winnebago Echo and the Winnebago Rebel. These work very similar to a traditional RV toilet, except that your black tank is about 5 gallons and it's removable. So you can take it out and dump your black tank into not only RV dumps, but also pit toilets, porta potties, or even a regular home or public toilet if you want to. Now, it's not exactly like you want to go parading through Starbucks with 5 gallons of sewage, but theoretically you could. So with a cassette, you've got sort of all the dumping options of a regular black tank and then additional options, so lots of places to dump. Now the trade-off, of course, is that with a 5-gallon black tank, you're going to be dumping quite a bit more often. Also, when the cassette is full, it weighs around 40 pounds, so if you're mobility constrained or maybe you have a shoulder injury or something, well, that's something to think about. There are still more fringe toilet options. There are like incinerating toilets, which only exist at trade shows. They claim to cremate your sewage. There are even bagging dry flush toilets, which are kind of like a big diaper genie for adults, but without diapers. But your RV probably didn't come with one of those, and if it did, well, you already know all about that. So there you have it. That's the basics of your RV's wastewater plumbing system. You can certainly go on for longer about it, but by now you should know enough that you could take your RV out for a weekend of camping and you wouldn't hesitate to use the toilet or the shower because you were worried about having to deal with it later. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll come back for the next in the series where we'll start to get practical and we'll talk about winter RVing, how to RV in the winter. If you want to get 33% more use out of your RV investment, definitely come back for that one. Anyway, that'll do it for now. Bye.